For today's archaeology crime story, we are headed to London, England, about a block away from here, to one of the world's most prestigious and venerable cultural institutions and museums, the British Museum. Until it was hit with an unbelievable bombshell in August 2023 in the form of a big scandal. It was revealed that the museum had been hit by decades of theft, and it turned out that the perpetrators was one of their own senior staff, a curator of Greek and Roman antiquities, who had been doing this for so long right under their noses. His name, Dr. Peter Higgs, and he had been working as a curator at the museum since 1993, so that it's possible that this theft went on as long as 30 years. That would be a lot of theft, and quite frankly, a lot of negligence on the part of the museum's management. Now, this is going to be a very tangled web that we are going to weave, and it's going to be a long story. So for simplicity's sake, I am just going to refer to the British Museum as the BM. Now, the Brits seem okay with this, which is why I'm going to use that term, but to American ears, I'm sorry, but that just sounds wrong.
But with Tylenol BM, I know I'm going to get a good night's sleep. It puts my mind at rest and I sleep soundly. So soundly, I sleep through my first dump in the morning.
Okay, in any event, let's just go with it. The year is 2016, and a Danish antiquities dealer and collector, Dr. Itai Gradel, who is an expert on ancient cameos, is on the hunt for some good buys on one of the oldest, most established platforms for trading antiquities, eBay.
What the
I know, crazy, right? Who knew, but people apparently trade valuable antiquities on online platforms like eBay, Amazon, etc. So let's just go with it. We'll come back to that later. Anyway, back to the story. So Gradel notices something curious. A rare and valuable cameo featuring the god Priapus, on sale for just £40 or about $50, a fraction of its actual value. And not only does Gradel have a photographic memory, but if you recall from our episode on that supposed Roman dildo, let's just say Priapus is a rather memorable god, for reasons that I hope are obvious. And just as Gradel is getting all excited, poof, the artifact is taken down from the site, no longer for sale. So looking at the old listing, Gradel recognizes the seller, Sultan 1966, as someone who he's bought from in the past, valuable stones often at basement bargain prices. Now, the seller behind Sultan 1966, who Gradel had dealt with before, well, he claimed to be a man named Paul Higgins, and said that he was just selling some old family stuff that had come down to him, and he didn't really seem to know what he had on his hands, or he wouldn't be selling it that cheaply. But disturbingly, with his photographic memory, Gradel recognizes this particular cameo with Priapus as matching one he had seen years before in a catalog from the BM. Meanwhile, in Hastings on England's southeast coast, site of the eponymous Battle of Hastings, a curator at the BM, Peter Higgs, not Higgins, realizes an error. This cameo is not only cataloged fully in the museum, but it's on the museum's public website. It was just too easily recognizable, so Higgs, recognizing his error, frantically removes the listing from eBay. Higgs then logs into the museum's internal catalog and attempts to alter the listing of this Priapus cameo in order to cover his tracks. And this would actually be the fatal flaw that allowed people to track down Higgs. You see, he had previously sold artifacts that were not totally cataloged or even uncatalogued in the museum, so they couldn't be so easily identified. Higgs then returns to the storeroom the next day, from which he pilfered the cameo to begin with, and returns it to its place, attempting to just cover the whole thing up. However, he here makes his second fatal error. which is that he was so greedy, rather than returning the object intact, he removed it from its gold mount, which he probably just sold cheaply for scrap gold. And unfortunately, once the extent of his crimes would later be fully revealed, a lot of the objects that were returned to the museum were also without their mounts and had damage from being wrenched out of them. And even for some of the objects that were fully intact in the museum, some of them were damaged as he clumsily tried to wrench them from their casings and mounts. Anyway, on the day all the shenanigans took place with the object being listed for sale and then taken down, Gradell contacted the seller, who he still knew as Higgins, asking why that happened. After all, Gradell smelled a bargain, as he knew the object to be worth as much as £15,000, quite frankly as high as £30,000 if it still had the gold mount, meaning Higgs was selling it for something like 1/400th of its actual value.
Dumb.
Higgs claimed the cameo actually belonged to his sister, who didn't want to sell, so the whole thing was just kind of a misunderstanding, hence he took down the listing. A bit suspicious, confused, and shaken up, Gradell just filed this away in his mind for the time being. And that was that. So fast forward 4 years to May 2020, and the photographic memory endowed Dr. Gradell is again perusing a catalog when he notices another cameo of a man with a funky hairdo that supposedly also belonged to the BM. And Gradell realized exactly where he had seen this one. It had been offered to him for sale by a noted antiquities dealer, Malcolm Hay. Now, as an aside, Malcolm Hay had previously had some legal issues regarding some questionable antiquities deals. I haven't gone into that, so I don't mean to malign him, but it just highlights how sort of shady this whole antiquities dealings thing is. So Gradell called Hay, who, to his credit, immediately contacted the British Museum with this story, who then responded simply that they were closed for COVID. How convenient. So instead, Hay contacted the guy who in turn had sold him the bauble, a dealer in Bath named Rolf van Kyer of the Helios Gallery. I told you, it's a tangled web we are weaving. And for his part, van Kyer knew exactly where he had gotten the cameo. He bought it off of eBay from a seller named Sultan 1966. Hearing this, Gradell went back to comb through all his records of purchases and correspondences with Sultan 1966, and he tracked down a receipt that actually identified the guy as Peter Higgs, not Higgins as he had claimed. Gradell shared this with van Kyer, who was shocked, recognizing that name, Peter Higgins, as a curator of Greek and Roman antiquities at the BM. And then, Gradell did a little bit of old-fashioned detective work, tracing Higgs to the same address that was on the sales receipt, and finding out his birth year of 1966, the same number on the seller's ID, and also the same number that was attached to an email associated with that ID.
What's the combination?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes.
That's amazing. I've got the same combination on my luggage.
With a seemingly airtight case, Gradell himself now contacted the BM and told them everything. And then nothing happened. You see, Higgs had kind of become a big guy at the BM, known as a world-class curator who had helped restore a stolen statue that was 2,000 years old to Libya back in 2015. So he was kind of a hero. Higgs had maybe kind of become too big to fail, you could say. Moreover, he had already been tipped off by another curator that Gradell had approached discreetly on social media, asking for her advice about how to handle such a delicate matter. So she went and actually told Higgs, believing him to be maybe being framed. And finally, Higgs had been covering his tracks for years. For example, with this latest cameo, the one with the funky hair, Higgs had actually gone back in the physical catalog and penciled something out that suggested that the thing had gone missing way back in 1963. To be perfectly honest, I personally think that sounds pretty amateurish and obvious, but whatever. So the internal investigation drags on, and in the meantime, Malcolm Hay, that other antiquities dealer who first tried to sell the funky-haired cameo to Gradell, well, he gets his hands back on the cameo, gives it back to the BM in May 2021, and a couple months later in July 2021, the BM contacts Gradell, who made this latest complaint, and inexplicably tells him that Higgs had been cleared of all wrongdoing, that the whole thing was a done deal. However, in December of that year, 2021, after other items were found to be missing or damaged, a double secret investigation is launched.
Double secret probation.
Double secret probation, sir?
And actually, it's not so double secret, because the outside curator hired to lead it, her name is Aurelia Masson-Berghoff, actually reports directly to Higgs.
Well, la-di-frickin-da!
Nevertheless, our heroine Aurelia was persistent, pushing forward over the objections and stonewalling of Higgs, and it soon turns out that the scale of the theft is staggering. In one room alone, Aurelia discovers that 1,161 objects are missing, constituting 3/4 of the inventory that's supposed to be in that room. As the findings mounted, Higgs made all kinds of excuses not to report them. He said it was his birthday, and reporting those bad news would be a real downer. He said that Christmas was coming up, and, that would just ruin the holiday spirit to dump this bad news on his colleagues. But to all this, Aurelia, for her part, basically said,
"Who gives a about Christmas stuff and decoration?"
But Higgs could not hold it off forever, and in late December, Aurelia's report finally made its way up to the museum's senior management. And from there, things happened quickly. Higgs was put on leave, the police were called, the museum's director resigned in disgrace, and the police raided Higgs's house, and they recovered tons of damning evidence, documentation, and lots of artifacts themselves. Now, at this point, I was tempted to show you this clip. But yeah, not so much. In fact, Higgs was not even formally fired until July 2023.
You're fired.
You're fired.
You're fired.
It takes a long time to fire people in the UK. And even though he was caught red-handed, criminal charges have yet to be filed. The police seized stuff from Higgs' home, and the BM put out a big request for people to check their records and report stuff that they suspected to be among the stolen goods, and I assume the museum also released a list of that as it was compiled. And finally, in March 2024, almost 4 years after this was initially reported by Gradell, the BM finally filed civil, not criminal, charges against Higgs. And honestly, it seems like pretty weak stuff. They asked him to list the goods he stole, to return the ones that he still had, and I assume damages will eventually be assessed as a result of this. By May 2024, out of the 1,500 estimated items that were stolen, 626 had been returned, another 100 had been located but not yet returned, meaning just about half the stuff was accounted for. And it appears like many of the dealers and buyers made the returns voluntarily, without compensation, though of course some were paid. And just like that, things started trickling back in, but the process is clearly going to be very long and arduous, and certainly some things will never be returned. And as for the BM, they committed to fully cataloging their holdings and tightening up their record-keeping procedures to ensure that this sort of thing never happens again, admitting actually in August 2024, in effect, that they had violated the law with respect to safeguarding antiquities. And that ends our tale for now. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about here. As we discussed first in our interview with Sam Hardy and that episode about the Nebra Sky Disk, These cases are very difficult to prosecute. In this case, even with all the evidence, I mean, the guy was caught red-handed almost 2 years later, and there's still no prosecution, no criminal charges filed. Amazing, right? Second, although antiquities dealers are often characterized as villains, in this case we can see that that's not true. There may be some shady ones, but here we see a few of them that genuinely just love what they're collecting, they're interested in it, they want to protect it, and they want to do the right thing. They're definitely not all bad. Look, some of them even made returns without any compensation. However, in this case, we even see that rare antiquities are being traded on eBay. How can this be? If we're charitable, saying that the shady antiquities dealers are really just a few bad apples in an otherwise upstanding industry, and most of them are good, like the ones in this story, that means that the system is rotten, not the people. So we can say,
don't hate the player, hate the game.
And while I don't think people really can or even should be stopped from selling things on online platforms, we definitely need to explore some other options like stricter documentation, chain of custody, insurance registration, etc., just to tighten up the whole process. As for the BM, its reputation has rightfully been incredibly tarnished. Look, even if they're committed to making all these improvements, the depth of the incompetence is stunning. That Higgs could have gotten away with this for so long really reveals an incredible amount of negligence and circling the wagons on the part of the staff there. The BM's initial response to months and months of complaints from concerned dealers was ho-hum and at times even defensive. Now, George Osborne, the chairman of the BM, he described the, quote, pretty elaborate lengths that Higgs went through to cover up his crimes. Elaborate? Well, at least for the stuff that's been made available publicly, like Higgs penciling out old records to change things and making ham-fisted attempts to edit the museum's online catalog, those actually seem pretty amateurish to me. It seems more like the museum failed in its basic stewardship duties, and I have a feeling the BM is not alone in this. And doesn't this all make the issue of repatriation even more salient? After all, in these big national museums like the BM, one of the arguments they make for having so much stuff from other countries is that those other countries are poor, dangerous, unable to care for the goods like the BM is. Well, after this story, how plausible is that? I think we can expect calls for repatriation to grow louder. On the other hand, let's actually show a little grace and not pile up on the BM too badly. Remember, like most museums in the UK, the BM is free, meaning that it is fulfilling a very important duty to make art and cultural heritage available to the public, and that's a great thing. However, that means that the museums are chronically underfunded. Putting on my economics cap, in these countries where museums are free, they become essentially a cost center, meaning the governments have every incentive to keep costs down and to promote efficiencies. I know it sounds harsh, but in this kind of system, taking the best care and safeguarding the museum collections are really not financially incentivized. However, if you charged for entry, market forces would take over and the museums and collections would go from being cost centers to revenue generators. And in this way, the government would actually have an incentive to do a better job taking care of the collections and promoting them and growing them. And in fact, the entry fees could help fund all of this. On the other hand, that model is, of course, totally incompatible with the idea of making the arts and culture accessible to everyone. And in fact, the BM is in a uniquely bad position in this regard. You see these museums like the BM, the Louvre in Paris, the Met in New York, they're what's known as universal museums, meaning that they gather stuff from all over the world to make it available for everyone in all one place. So you don't have to go to Egypt to see Egyptian stuff, and Mexico for Aztec stuff, and Greenland for their native stuff, etc. In these amazing institutions, you'll find some of the best Egyptian, Chinese, Indian, whatever collections that you will find anywhere in the world. On the other hand, more local or national sites can compromise by offering locals free or reduced entry and charging the full fees to international tourists. Now, this may seem unfair to us foreigners, but there is logic behind it. After all, the cultural heritage kind of belongs to the locals. They should have easy access to it. Whereas for us tourists, it's a privilege to see these things, and we should be willing to pay for that. However, if these universal museums claim to be for everyone and use their international status as a place for everyone as an argument against repatriation, they can't very well go charging locals very little or free entry and everyone else high fees. It just won't work for the BM and other universal museums. So I don't really know what the answer is. Should museums like this be free? Should they charge a fee or something in between? Perhaps you can put your thoughts in the comments. What I can say is one of my favorite sayings from economics is,
There are no solutions. There are trade-offs.
and that's what we have here in this case. So let's cut the BM a little bit of slack. Okay, a lot to think about here. I'd like to give you a happy ending, but that's only about half true, given that half of the objects that were stolen seem to have been identified, and it's becoming a little truer each day as more of them are trickling in, and hopefully the disgraced Mr. Higgs is closer to prosecution. Watch this space. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.